And welcome again to Theories of Reality. I'm Professor Borrowdale, and today we're going to talk more about reincarnation. I've got a short video clip, about 10 minutes on evidence for reincarnation, and it highlights the work of Dr. Attention, please. Dr. Ian Stevenson. You guys are liking to meditate and stuff. I hear you talk about that. You should totally be into this stuff. So this is the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson, who's kind of a pioneer researcher in this. He has a doctorate in psychology. He's academic. There's another professor, Jim Tucker, who's sort of taken up his work, and they talk about in this video some of the evidence for reincarnation. So they'll show this, and we'll have a brief discussion of it. So please, if you have a comment about the video, hold it for about 10 minutes. Pretend you're at the movies and yeah. All right. So enough said about that.
Can you turn up the resolution on the video?
No, I cannot.
Wait,
maybe I can.
Yeah.
Like here?
No, it's you had it. Yeah, settings.
It's probably as up
and then
as.
There might be a higher one. Hopefully.
I don't think so.
They suck. All right.
It's on. Yeah. So it's an older video, and upload it. This is why look at the name of the company. This is, I'm guessing this is like a pre-2015 company before the rise of ISIS. So
ISIS.
ISIS.
Yeah. All right. Here we go.
Hello, I'm Robert J. Sawyer, and this is Supernatural Investigator. This week, we investigate the concept of reincarnation. Half of the planet's population shares the same belief that some part of us survives death and that reincarnation is a real possibility. You may be surprised to learn that the most compelling support does not come from the world of religious or spiritual studies, but from the world of science. Tom Harper is one of those seeking answers, and this week, he's our supernatural investigator.
I've come to the point with regard to reincarnation that I think not only is it a worthy subject of investigation, but that the evidence strongly suggests that it may, in fact, be true. Well over 50% of the Earth's inhabitants believe in some form of reincarnation. So it's very widespread.
And for Tom Harper, the most compelling evidence comes from the work of the late Dr. Ian Stevenson and his successor, Dr. Jim Tucker.
This work began here at the University of Virginia back around 1960. Ian Stevenson was the chairman of the Department of Psychiatry. When he heard about these cases from various parts of the world of very young children who said that they remember previous lives, and he was curious enough where he decided to investigate and spent the next 40 years of his career traveling to various parts of the world. And he and his colleagues during that time, we've now collected over 2,500 cases of these young children who were making these claims. So then our task becomes trying to sort out what is this? What is causing kids to say this? And one way to test this is to see if what the child says actually matches a particular person who lived and died in the past.
Ian Stevenson would actually go to the city, take the child with him, and in some cases the child would point to specific places, bringing up specific dates and places and names. Of course, we can't rule out coincidence. We can pretty much rule out fraud in most cases because Dr. Stevenson was a very careful investigator.
He wrote in an academic style and like a lawyer, presenting the witnesses, where the evidence came from. He had subjects take lie detector tests, sign affidavits. He was so concerned that the evidence would be accepted in the scientific community.
We use the term solved and unsolved. And solved means that a previous person has been identified whose life matches the statements that the child made. Of the 2,500, It's probably roughly 50-50, the ones that have been solved versus not solved.
Even to his dying day in 2007, he never claimed to the scientific world, I have got the ironclad proof. Remember, he had that skeptical spirit. Nevertheless, someone as careful as he was so strongly moved towards the possibility is, to me, a fairly powerful argument.
James Leininger was a little boy in Louisiana who began saying that his plane had crashed, that he had been shot down by the Japanese. He gave some very specific details. In fact, this was when he was 2. His parents were able to ask him questions about these horrific nightmares he had about a plane crash. And he was able to say that he had been shot down by the Japanese and that his plane had flown from the Natoma, is what he named the boat that his plane had taken off of. In addition, the boy later saw a picture of Iwo Jima and said that was where he was shot down. Also began saying that he was the 3rd James. When his dad searched online, he eventually found that there was the USS Natoma Bay. The Natoma Bay was involved in the Iwo Jima operation. There was one pilot from the Natoma that was killed in Iwo Jima, and his name was James Houston, Jr. So James Leininger would be the 3rd James after the Jr. Another detail that James gave was that he had a friend named Jack Larson, and it turned out that there was another pilot on the Natoma named Jack Larson. The child was talking about a past life from more than 50 years before, which is unusual in our cases. So there was seemingly no way that he could have known the details that he came up with.
Goodbye, James and Houston.
His father was an evangelical Christian who was totally resistant to reincarnation. But his son gave out so much information about World War II. They said, you know, he could not have learned this watching Sesame Street.
I salute you.
I think that what reincarnates, as far as one can tell from all the literature and so on, is the essential self.
When I was about 2 years old, I told my mother that my name was not really Barbro, it was Anne.
Barbara was born in 1954 in Sweden to a Christian family, and they had no idea who Anne Frank was, because the diary of Anne Frank had not yet been translated and published in Sweden.
I know my name was Anne Frank, but they insist calling me on Barbro. And my parents insisted me to call them Mom and Pa, and I knew they were not my real parents.
Well, her parents thought this was all fantasy until something happened when she was 10 years old. By this time, the parents knew who Anne Frank, the historic figure, was. And they went on a tour of European cities, including Amsterdam, where the Anne Frank house is located.
We were at the hotel room, and my father said that let's do the Anne Frank house first. So I called for a cab. And I found myself saying to them, we don't need a cab, we're not far away. And I knew exactly where we were.
And her parents said, how could you know? You've never been here. And she said, well, I know, let me show you. And she took him by the hand and led him on a 10-minute walk through the winding streets of Amsterdam directly to the Anne Frank house.
And then when we came up towards the house, I saw that the steps outside were different, were changed. So I stopped and I said, it's strange, they have changed those steps. When I came into that house, it was the most horrifying feeling I have ever had. Because all of a sudden I was back to my dreams. I recognized everything I had seen ever since I was a little child.
And Barbara looked at a wall in a room where Anne had spent time, and she said to her mother, look, the pictures of the movie stars are still on the wall.
I saw all these pictures from newspaper magazines that was cut out, and it was from movie stars and song stars and things. And I said to my mother, look, the pictures are still there. And it was like almost coming home. And she said, what pictures? And she looked on the wall, and I looked on the wall, and there were no pictures there.
She got confused, started to cry, and the mother said, well, let's ask the tour guide. And the tour guide said, yes, indeed, the photos that Anne Frank had clipped are normally on that wall, but we took them down because people were touching them, taking them. We're going to put them under glass and then put them back. And her parents at that point realized she was not having fantasies, that she was having memories of a past lifetime. Barbara not only had the memories, she also replicated the talent of Anne Frank and was a child prodigy writer.
It was everything from poetry to little stories, thoughts about the higher power, reincarnation, where we came from, where we were going, but nothing that I had memories from being Anne Frank or anything, because I had decided not to talk about it anymore.
And Barbara had her first book published at age 12, and she had another 8 or 9 books published in her teenage years. And her first book became the best-selling prose book in Swedish history. And guess what? Barbara has the same face as Anne Frank.
There's certainly evidence from our cases that there can be these memories from past lives that are in children. Now, evidence is not the same thing as proof, but there's no question that there is empirical evidence for it.
That was real interesting.
I mean, yeah, the kid didn't probably learn about the war from Sesame Street. But, like,
Yeah.
that's not the only thing this kid has access to.
Yeah.
And like, I feel like his brain's gonna just, as a child, you're already trying to.
Hey guys, it's my mask.
And I think his little brain started putting things together. He probably like did a little bit of his own childlike research. I mean, bro, War II. It's simple keys that he could understand and type into Google would definitely give him enough.
I don't think there was a Google.
How long
back
ago
then.
was that though?
Yeah, I wonder if
When that kid, you saw
Not
how old
the
the video
him,
was?
Frank.
Yeah, even before that.
I don't know, I was 10.
You probably had the access of it.
How old was the film?
Yeah, I think
That
this
kid.
the film's probably like it might be 2012, and the kid was like
Oh yeah.
I don't know. It would be like I don't know. We'd have to guesstimate, but yeah, I think Google around our search engines. But you know, the kid's only like he's 2 years old when he's starting to say these things. But you know, there's TV, right? And you guys probably what TV? What's that? You see, you know, there's the he's around when there's cable. There's like, you know, the History Channel, and it's like they have all this World War II footage. It used to be the joke used to be people would call it the Hitler Channel because it's just like all old World War II footage because that was what was out there for free, and they didn't have a lot of money, and so they just like show all these old newsreels with like voiceover like 24/7. And I imagine there was some stuff about that. Now the other thing to consider is what other thoughts about it. So he might have picked it up other places, but like he's the third James. He's you know, the name Iwo Jima, I suppose, is a place where, you know, there's a big decisive battle. So a lot of soldiers died there. The Notomo. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And that bit about being the third James.
It happened to be like the one guy that did die in the plane.
Yeah. So I've thought, how about those things? Like, what would a skeptic say?
I think what we said, that he could have gotten that information somehow from somebody or something.
Yeah, or it could be that you know, where are we getting this information from? Or we're getting it from the parents, right?
Yeah.
So the parents and the researcher. So
He did say that his parents were evangelicals.
right, so that they're not
in reincarnation.
Yeah.
So it could be
So,
and so it seems like they wouldn't have an interest in believing in reincarnation.
which is why they might have like their memories might have doctored themselves after they hit a breaking point.
Right, so you might, like, the kid might have said something like, like he has these dreams and he's talking about being a World War II pilot, and maybe the parents are like, wow, maybe there really is reincarnation, and their beliefs change, and then they, you know, ask him questions, and then they said he saw a picture of he saw a picture of Iwo Jima and he said, that's where I died. Well, where did he see a picture of Iwo Jima? That's what I'm interested in. You just don't like see those every day.
Yeah.
It seems like the parents, he's having all these dreams, right? What are the parents going to do? Maybe get him a book on World War II history or on aviation or something. He's really into airplanes and he's like
the
drawing pictures of
imagination is like
airplanes.
extremely strong when you're 2.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's plenty of little ties you could tie together when you're 2 years old.
It might even be that he picked up that.
Just like yeah.
Walking on.
It might even be that there's a picture of that. I don't know how obscure that guy is. They had a picture of him and everything. Maybe he's in one of some history book.
Yeah. See, it would have been interesting if he actually wasn't very documented. Like if it was like really shallow type information, except for those little details. So like no stories were made about him or anything, and he just somehow knew all this stuff.
And this is this one of these cases where the devil's in the details, right? So when you're dealing with like anecdotal evidence, you don't know, and of course, do we know the parents are evangelicals? Well, I suppose that it might turn out that they're evangelicals, but they have kind of like there are a lot. I mean, people who are members of religions, they don't always go with like party line on what their religion is, just like politics. And the same, so it could be they're evangelicals, but they might have some belief in reincarnation, like pre-existing, or you don't know, like, so there's the researcher, there's the parents, there's sort of I don't know what you call it, like that sometimes anthropologists call this cultural contamination, where natives come up with some like scientific belief and they say, oh look, they must have picked this up through some supernatural means, and it turns out they were talking to missionaries and got the information from them. So the kid might have just come across some of these things and kind of pieced them together. And then you get this thing, this is something that's done by magicians. They call it cold reading, where you say something and you look for a reaction of the person, and you sort of adjust it a little bit depending on their reaction. So if they give you like a positive reaction, you like go along those lines. If they give it like a negative reaction, then you go some other direction.
You do a little subtle.
And it's a way, and you just look for like rules. And some people might do this subconsciously too, where you say something and you get like approval, and your parents want to hear more. And you're like, okay, more like in this direction, and it can just be done without anybody realizing what's going on. So this is why I suggested like you could do like a really good study on reincarnation, but you would have to make sure that you had like controls and third-party objective neutral observers collecting the data. And certainly that's not what you got with Ian Stevenson. There was that guy that said, oh, but we can rule out fraud in most cases because Ian Stevenson was a careful researcher. But it's just him going off with like maybe some assistants, talking to some villagers, and says, let's go for a ride and tell me some stuff, and he's just writing it all down. And as far as I know, after the fact they go back try to verify this stuff, but I'm wondering, did he like find out ahead of time, like, okay, where's this kid been? Who does he know? Who are his relatives? Has he ever been to the city before? Those sorts of things. Now, after the fact, he asks, and just, of course, people are incentivized when they find out, oh, we're doing this study. This is a reincarnation researcher, and he wants to know, could that kid have picked up all this stuff, like from being in the city? Oh, no, he's never been here before. And most of the studies he did were in India and Asia, where the belief is widespread. And that's where you get lots of people, lots of children in these areas have these memories, and it's really rare in the West. Although those were 2 cases in Sweden and America.
The one part that I kind of was interested in is he said he did a lie detector test on them. Is that like 100%?
So a lie detector test only works. Well, first of all, you can beat a lie detector test. There are ways of. It basically what the lie detector test does is it looks at your perspiration rate, your heartbeat, and maybe some other things, and so it tells like when people are nervous, it goes off, and they do like a baseline reading when they see that. So they have you sitting there, you're nervous already, right? So because you're on the hot seat. So then they take a baseline reading, and then they start asking you questions, and they ask a question like, what is your name, right? And you're not going to freak out about what your name is unless you have an issue with your name. But they ask other questions like where do you live, and just ordinary things. And then they say what did you tell President Obama about that surveillance on Trump or whatever, right? And Spike, or what you see. So the idea is somebody asks you something that you don't want to reveal or that you're nervous about. And you say, I know nothing about that. It might ping if you're lying because you're nervous you're going to be found out. So if you sincerely believe what you're saying, then it's not going to tell you the person. So it's a lie detector. It's not a truth detector. So there's some people who are really zen that can beat the lie detector, that might practice lying to people and stare in the mirror and try to be perfectly calm. Or sometimes people believe their own lies. Do that? Yeah, the kids. So the kids.
Yeah, that's
right. Kids like to
lie. And maybe their imagination is so good that their lie is real to them.
It could be.
Yeah.
Plus, it's reinforced, and he gets. He's getting rewarded for.
So it's nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
I have a friend who's a school teacher, and kids will lie as second nature to try to avoid consequences for their bad behavior. They do it all the time. They do it very naturally.
I think what we'll put all.
And sometimes with boldness. That's because they don't think they'll be found out.
So I mean, without parental or superior reinforcement, and if the child was cut off from digital resources, and we found one that said that they had these past memories, we could isolate the child and then put them through a battery of questions that information that just is not recorded, but maybe this person who is dead has a daughter who is still alive or a granddaughter, and they know specific scars that he never went to the hospital for, and there's this weird X scar that nobody should know that he has, but a specific relative that this child had never met.
Yeah. And
then B, we're in the 21st century, so at some point in time when it's really publicized technology, we can just put a helmet on that kid and be we're just gonna read your thoughts.
Okay, that's all. I like the first thing you said there, right? So usually what happens is people volunteer information and then they try to verify it. But one thing you could do is to try to get the information about this person, so you get you identify the person, the person, especially they give a name, and so you get the person that seems like this is all about, and then you ask the kid independent questions, see if he can answer those or she can answer those.
Yeah.
So if they ask that woman about Anne Frank, I don't know, how old were you when the Nazis came and got you, and how did you die? How about that? I mean, some of that's things that if you really were Anne Frank, it seems like you would know how you died.
See, but then the next question comes is, if reincarnation is real, how much of the memories of those past lives do you retain once you enter a new life?
So you wouldn't remember everything, but it seems and I suppose you might not know which things you would remember.
She remembered that there was pictures on the wall. That's something super subtle, but
I feel that wouldn't be memorable. I feel just the way our brains are hardwired to memorize pain more, she would only remember the majority of bad things, would just have a priority over all the good things.
Yeah, so you would expect events, and this is true psychologically, but of course this is has to do with your brain wiring. So if it's your soul, is that going to follow you to the next life, right? But psychologically, you tend to remember things that are really traumatic and painful, unless you repress them, which case you might not remember them. But you might ask me, if she says, I died in a gas chamber and she was shot or something like that. I don't know how Anne Frank died. But if she made big mistakes, or if she made mistakes about the Nazis and said, I saw this emblem on the soldiers thing, and it was the emblem wasn't used until after she was killed. There's lots of things. Or she reported inaccurate things about the death camps or something like that. So you could sort of do it both ways. You could collect information, but you could also ask questions. And you have open, and make sure when you're asking questions, you're not you're not asking leading questions, because then and so the idea is you want to have a person that doesn't know they don't know what the questions are about, so you want to have someone else that's just like asking the questions, that doesn't know why they're being asked, or knows nothing about the experiment.
Yeah.
So like with Anne Barbara, is it possible that she knew more than one language as a child, and she could have gotten information on Anne Frank from outside of the Swedish?
Yeah, so I mean, Sweden is, I don't know what
You said that her diary hadn't been translated yet.
Into Swedish,
Yeah.
into the Swedish culture. So like it was translated into other languages though.
Oh, I thought the book wasn't out when
No, it just wasn't translated for them in Sweden.
Oh.
Yeah.
They didn't have a translation in Sweden, but there were translations.
So she wouldn't have had availability to any copies.
In Swedish.
In Swedish, maybe she knows English or something. People are
Or would they be selling the books there? I mean,
probably.
Yeah, I guess.
You
So.
could get, maybe that's how you can get a hold of it somewhere.
Fair enough. Yeah.
I'm not sure what other language. I know Switzerland, people speak lots of languages. Over in Europe, people tend to speak more languages because they're smaller countries closer together. They're like the size of U.S. states.
And I could even see like someone who had a copy that was not in Swedish, but knew both languages, could like have like a book that no one else in this country knew, and probably like found cool things in there that he wanted to spit out to the youth, and like told these interesting little stories that these children just like absorbed, and then
the whole knowing where she was though in the city, and then finding her way walking through the city, and then getting there. Where's the step?
It's not like we had maps then.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, that was interesting. But I mean, those are just the.
Did they describe Anne Frank's house in that book? It's been a while since I read through it.
It could be that she had, like, they had, like, you don't know at what point they decided to go to the house, whether they had, like, brochures, whether, it's,
Yeah, it was all from the parents.
I feel like I
and
can
what
get
they
lost
say.
and find Anne Frank's house on accident too, though. I feel like I have that kind of luck that I can just like, I'm gonna walk this way. Like, well, I don't know why I looked left, but there's Anne Frank's house. Maybe I should go inside, or should I keep walking? And like, I mean, I know she had the intention, so it's a little bit different because she was like, she was like following a specific desire, but like.
so
At
there
what
it's
point does
like.
probability become
Yeah.
something?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Like, and I guess here, like, this is the way like life happens, and you're not always like, you can't always carry an entourage of experimenters with you, to make sure everybody's being objective and nobody's like picking up things somehow. So that in some other way, this is why there's a difference. Like the guy said, there's a difference between evidence and proof, and so evidence has to be like rigorously controlled. And you make sure there's no contamination. It's kind of like going back to like the David Blaine conversation, right? So you see David Blaine levitate or stick a rod through his arm or whatever, like, and you say, well, that's got to be a trick. I don't know how it's done, but it's got to be a trick. And you might have no idea how it's done, but it seems like you'd still have like a reason to be skeptical about it. And I think the same thing would be true of these experiences that people have. What else about, let's see, so Ian Stevenson is this guy that did all these studies, and he's got some clout because he's like the head of a psychology department. But his method is just to go around and collect stories and try to verify them without any careful control. So even though the one guy says, oh, he was a careful researcher, he wasn't really doing something like a scientific method. He was doing, basically, he was like really into reincarnation. He got interested in it, and he pursued it like as a hobby. And even though he wrote in a dry academic style, there are a lot of people that have like their pet theories and they write all this stuff about them, but they're not doing something like science. And so when that guy from the Supernatural show, which is all about like spreading belief in the supernatural, says the most surprising evidence doesn't come from the world of spirituality, but from the world of science. I think most, I would guess that nearly all like scientific investigators would say that his method was flawed, and that he wasn't a careful researcher, and that these are things that might make you wonder, might be worthy of further investigation, but they're not anything close to scientific knowledge.
I think what will put all of this to rest is once we have AI that can decipher whether someone is lying.
Well, the problem though is that these kids might really believe these stories. They just might be picking up things subconsciously.
But if we're just like going through their brain, like we will be able to differentiate like the thoughts that we're seeing through their mind.
Yeah.
it seems like there's like, okay, maybe we'll have like this crazy future tech, but what, that's gonna help us solve all our problems,
Just
but,
go through his memories to see how many times he's watched television shows that would reinforce this information, or how many times he's had conversations that have reinforced this, and like, the rest is just like what he's put together, but we'd be able to track every existing memory he still had to see like if he had at any point in time received this information.
but that, I mean, that, it seems like with that level of technology, like that problem would probably already be solved at, I don't know.
We have the tech now, we can see
But it's not-
dreams, we can see dreams.
You can see like a really hazy image of
Very
like a
specific
visual
people. We're not like
impression.
going out there and locking people up in like,
Yeah.
we don't have like a Walmart of dreams right now.
But-
Yeah, it's gonna take a while for us to get there where I can go to the store and buy like a dream journal and like sleep with the dream journal on.
But that, I mean, but that's like, I mean, that, so, I don't know how to, so, I mean, that might solve the problem, but that's like years and years in the future, and like, is there a simple way to solve it? Like,
That might help Jim to
An
me.
easier way.
okay, can somebody lend me $10,000 for a cup of coffee?
Yeah, I got you.
And you say, Borrowdale, what, a cup of coffee doesn't cost $10,000, and I say, it does if you drink it in Brazil, right? And you say, but why don't you just get a cup of coffee down at the bookstore? Well, first of all, because it sucks, but you know, I could go down to some fancy coffee place in Eugene. Why would I fly to Brazil, right? So you guys want to fly to Brazil for a damn cup of coffee? Okay, in the
Yes.
future where we have these crazy technologies, maybe all our problems will be solved. But you could do it right now. You could just say, okay, let's get a bunch of kids that are starting as they have these experiences, and they tell all this stuff, and you try to look at like, and actually what you want to do is probably have like a random sample of kids, and then see like a big sample, and then only a certain proportion of them are going to have these experiences.
It'd have to be a huge survey of like a generation of birth, because like there's gonna be so many that like
Well, if you
we're
did,
not gonna be able to control.
well, if
all
you
the
did it,
things.
like say if you did it in India, for example, if you did it in India,
Still
like
want,
this is
20,
really
30
it's a really prevalent thing, which I think ought to make you suspicious, right? Like why even now they show these two
because their
Western
beliefs
people.
reinforce it.
What's that?
Their beliefs reinforce it. And I feel
Exactly.
like one child says to another
Right.
child, and that child just mirrors that and picks it up, and then whatever like haphazard thoughts they come with, they start to try to identify as.
Yeah, it's part of their culture. Like find your ancestors.
We have imaginary friends in the West. I think they have reincarnation.
Yeah, maybe yeah. So then, yeah, I mean that'll make you suspicious, right? Why do these experiences pop up in kids and in places where people really believe in reincarnation, but in the West where people tend not to, people don't have these, these recollections? Well, it's because maybe kids have fantasies, and they hear about this belief in reincarnation, and they play make-believe about their reincarnated ancestors, and sometimes they hit on something that fits in with something else that happened, and then the parents are like, oh, did you remember your ancestor? Tell us more about them. And then they say, was it, did he have hairy thumbs? Oh, that sounds a lot like, Uncle Rabindranath, right? So over in the other village, have you ever been, would you like to go to the village? And he goes like, here's his house, right? And then Ian Stevenson comes along, and they're in this another city, and he's like, that's where I lived.
Sounds like reinforced bias. Is what
Yeah.
I feel like. Not that we're discounting it, but it just seems like it'd be harder to weed through for actual cases of reincarnation.
Maybe put the lie detector test to the parents. Did you tell your kid this? Did you tell your kid this? Did you tell your
I
kid
suppose, yeah.
Would it work if their memories were altered? Because we all do that. We all change our memories.
That
It
is
could be
true,
they
that
didn't
is true.
remember. They don't remember like
How far
prodding
does it
them,
go
right?
back?
Yeah. So, but I think just like the thing is like instead of thinking about the intentions of the individual and their subjective mental state, which is all the lie detector test tells you about, you try to get some like objective claims and then try to see whether you can verify them in the real world.
Yeah.
And you also want to find out like what does a kid know, and that's kind of hard to do because you're coming in the middle of it. So there, it might be better like to have a random sample and see how many of them have these remembrances. But so this is what again we call anecdotal evidence that has limited evidentiary value, and But it kind of makes your head, you scratch your head and you think, that's really weird. And at a certain point, all these coincidences seem like they point to something. But maybe it's just we're getting like the really good cases, and maybe, if you have like 2,500 cases, you try out your best cases, maybe they're gonna look pretty good, but maybe they're built on coincidence and conjecture and contamination and little bits of this and that. I want to come back to the personal identity question. Just like this idea of so suppose this is really happening. Is it really you? Like this guy says something. The guy narrator says something. Survives your body, and that woman's saying these weren't my real parents. My real parents, were somebody else, and I'm really Anne Frank. And what does that mean? Like she remembers some of the things that Anne Frank remembered and can tell you about them, but and there I was sort of weird to even looked like her.
So if the soul reincarnates, it sounds like the soul is infinite and the body is finite. So personality is finite and almost non-existent. It's just a shell for the soul through like whatever fluctuations it's going through in and out of life and death, or one life to the other life, because I guess we're calling death a new form of life. If there's a reincarnation, if like it seems to skip the physical sense of time, then like you're going into another life, and then you're just like, it's like a binary form of life. So then like, would it be you? Well, not the you that we could communicate in this dimension then, because like, it's just a finite shell, it's just like, the shell is just a mirror and like deciding factor of how to survive and progress through life, where like the you, the soul, like
the shell is the identity.
Yeah, like that's really hard to tell if it's a unified consciousness with personal identity of the souls, or if it's just like a unified sense of the universe, or like, if not, like, I guess my soul isn't me, but my soul is its own identity that's separate from his soul's identity.
So then, what happens when let's suppose you're reincarnated. So each person is different. They have. So you think about like personhood again.
Same soul, different personality, different identity.
Yeah. So you think about like what makes a person.
Like if I took an engine out of a Chevy and I put it in another Chevy, like, is it the same car or is it a new car? Because the only thing that's different is like I only have the engine. The engine drives the car. So if I put the engine in the other car, is it a new car or is it the same car?
Yeah.
I think it's a new car.
With physical objects, you get in these kind of paradoxes, like the ship of Theseus, right, where you're throwing off the boards one after one, and then find out someone was collecting the whole time and puts together a new ship, and you got two ships one that's made of all the old boards and one that's made of completely new boards, and you can ask like, and actually the way that the example usually goes is you replace the boards one at a time, and at the after all the boards have been replaced, let's say, well, as long as there's continuity, it's the same ship. But then what if someone was collecting the boards as you're casting them off and made this like crappy ship that barely stays afloat and just sort of patched up the boards?
Sounds like a zombie.
You see, is that like the real ship? Or so as long as like if you got one that's made up of all the old boards, which one do you go with? The thing that's made of the same stuff, or the same one that maintained the same structure over time?
I realize that makes my metaphor bad, because like I am still holding the same engine from the previous life to the next life, and the engine's still materialistic. So like,
well, you just let's take an analogy like your memories and your the personality. This is usually what things people
that
think
analogy
about.
I think leads to the doppelganger theory, where every car made that was like a 2006 car, although like it's updated from the 2005 car, like they look almost exactly the same, but like one's got a 5.7 liter engine versus like a 5.3 liter engine, right?
What about like cars that are mass produced?
Mass produced.
But like there's the differences. So the difference between I don't know, 2 Toyota Corollas, right? And there's a million of those. Like they're exactly the same model, but they're not the same car because they're distinct individuals.
So I would think it's the same thing for us.
So, but there's not, so but then you're like, it's like, there's like the individual car. So I've got this car and it's an individual car and it's not the same car as somebody else's Toyota Corolla. So it's got its own identity. When I go out in the parking lot, you know, my key is only gonna fit like, you know, my car. And it's not the same car as some other car that's a different car, but exactly similar, right? So there's two, so identity, so then with persons, you might have people that are similar, that have similar tastes, similar personalities, but there's distinct people, like they're distinct centers of consciousness. Now what gets weird though is when you have the idea of the soul, this immaterial substance, which is a vehicle for consciousness, that's going from body to body, but each time, it's not like it carries all the personality and memories and all this stuff together. The memories, according to people's experiences, get tamped down and rarely pop up, and the personality can be completely different.
And I feel like if we did reincarnate though, we wouldn't have to learn to use the bathroom anymore. Once we're born, like no diapers needed.
Yeah, why does everybody forget all this stuff? So this is like, and this goes with like this idea that like learning. Now, Plato has this theory that learning is actually remembering, and it's a matter of just sort of prodding these old memories. But it looks like, I mean, everything we know from neurology is that people and psychology and early childhood development is that there's these various stages of personality development, and like people, for example, like temperament. Temperament is partly hereditary, so we can predict what your temperament will be by looking who your parents are. It's partly environment, and so people with, say, mood disorders tend to have parents with mood disorders. So, and so to jump to like this sort of idea that, oh, well, you were, you know, you had this trauma in a past life and that's why you can't manage your emotions, seems like it's a leap, because a more likely explanation is that your mother would like scream at you and physically abuse you, like randomly, right? And it's caused you to have generalized anxiety because you didn't know when the next attack was going to be, and you didn't know what to do to be rewarded or punished, and so you end up with this, you know, anxiety disorder, right? It's a common thing. Or like whether a kid is shy or whether they're outgoing, those things we can have like really good explanations in terms of environment and heredity as to why people are like that. So then where's like this past life stuff even come in, right? It seems like it's kind of laid on top of that stuff. And then, so, and it seems like if these memories are really, you know, they don't seem to be really doing anything, except for they pop up and people like to talk about them and they're interesting, but they don't. It seems like that this idea that life is a school and you're learning things, it doesn't really seem to fit with people's experiences, because babies don't seem to know very much, right? I mean, you don't know how to talk, right? And you don't know the languages that you spoke in your past life. Now there are again anecdotal reports of people speaking languages that they don't know, but there's no independent verification of that, right? So one thing you might want to do, if you do a hypnotic regression, you run a recorder, and if the person starts talking Arabic and they're 3 years old, and it turns out it's not just babbling, but it's actually they're talking in Arabic in a dialect, you know, in the area that they say they're from, that would be really strong evidence. I just don't know anybody's done that, and I haven't seen any cases like that. And usually it's just kind of like exorcisms, right? So that people say, oh, when people have demons, they do an exorcism and they speak foreign languages, and they couldn't know, and it's the demon. But there's no independent corroboration. There's just, you know, people who are like shouting, you know, the power of Christ compels you, and some kid that's like wriggling around and probably, you know, suffering from a dissociative disorder.
So, I mean, like, if reincarnation is real, is the soul parasitic? Because we also have, like, the soul going from animal bodies to human bodies, and, like, if so, like, why are we stuck coming back to this place? Because there's no other life outside of the planet for us to, like, leech onto and, like,
I wouldn't know.
Yeah, the animal body is sort of a separate thing. Like people, people differ. I think in India people do believe in reincarnation to animals. Tends to be, I think, more of a class thing. I think the more the more kind of intellectual and educated Indians tend to believe that it's just restricted to humans, but there's some that believe it's that you can be reincarnated as animals, and so there's beliefs about, like, you know, they don't, I think they don't poison rats, for example, because a belief that it could be like a relative who's been reincarnated as a rat.
I'd say from personal experience.
It's not universal, but go ahead.
I think you're good.
So, but let's just stick to with humans for a minute. Although it'd be real, so if you're reincarnated as a rat, why can't you put together like little, like, you know, pieces of brain and spell out words, and, you know, why can't you use a computer? Why have we seen no rats that can use computers, and, or, you know, a monkey who's like as
brain.
intelligence as a human? Okay, yeah.
By with that, I guess I'm saying is like, why maybe you can't translate over is.
Yeah,
but then
if
the memories are down
in my
there.
past life. If I put on a glider suit and jumped out of a plane, should I not know how to, like, work with the winds as I'm falling and stay up longer, maybe?
Like, why can't the monkey play the piano, right? if he
they're
were limited.
limited by the physical part, like the brain isn't
Yeah.
complex enough to do such things.
Maybe your brain needs to be extremely complex to be able to tap into those types of.
But then you get like the Occam's razor thing, right? So like you have the child prodigy, and, you know, you do a brain scan and say, well, this part of the brain that deals with music, it's like super sophisticated, and it seems different from a normal person's brain. And so he's like a savant, right? And he's similar to, you know, all these other savants that can do math, and they can do all these other things, like, you know, really well without, you know, and they can play a piece on the piano just listening to it, even though they've never played it before. But then there's people who say, well, that's reincarnation, and they were like a famous, you know, piano player and composer way back when. This is like a reincarnation of Mozart. But then what's like why jump to that explanation? Why not just go with the scientific one, which seems to explain it?
I don't think there's reincarnation of people, but I think there is an infinite amount of observation possible. So, like, for instance, you could have infinite amount of observers that are a part of you, but they would all think that you are you, because they're all working through that same brain. But then, what is that material substance that allows us to observe? And for some reason, like, let's say when we were particles, billions of particles separated, what was our observation then? But for some reason, when you built all those particles together, then it forms a different type of observation. And then when you die, maybe there's another form of observation that we just can't even comprehend, because we only have 5 senses of observation now.
Yeah, so like 2 things, astral projection, and then like inhabiting a pre-inhabited body. Like, if we can reincarnate and our soul isn't bound to our physical body, then astral projection seems to be like a viable field. And if so, like, what does that say about the soul? If it still looks like you, like your soul you looks like your body you, and then like what happens if you like jump into another body? Do you like you leave that body looking like a combination of the 2 of you, or like can you stay in someone else's body, and if so, what happens to your body?
And I think existence is just creating patterns in your brain, neurons forming patterns, and when you die, those patterns are eradicated and you restart. But there's absolutely chance that some types of skills can be seemingly the same as someone else, because everyone can do a lot of the things the same way. Like, there's some special people like savants, but like, I'm not the only person that knows how to play piano. Other people know how to play piano. They didn't reincarnate from me. They've just formed those neurological patterns in their brains to be able to successfully do that.
And we have substances that like induce these out-of-body experiences, and like these.
And is that a different observation?
I don't know. I remember like the last time I did DMT, like, I'm pretty sure that I knew that I was still in the bedroom that I was in, but like, there was not a bedroom. I was like in a desert on like a couple different dimensions, and like things are moving and morphing and folding into each other, and like my arm was not a human arm. It was like humanoid, but like it was bent, and like, I don't know. I was like definitely in what I would consider not this life or in this plane of existence, although like I still had a connection to my body.
And this is a good point generally about supernatural experiences, is that it may be that the sorts of things that people experience are just based on weird things their brain is doing, not something in objective reality. Well, on that note, let's take a 10-minute break and we'll talk some more about reincarnation.
Yeah, but like, even with psychedelics, it's, the wonder is that actually
All right, we're back. So we're talking about these questions. It's sort of like, sometimes it's hard to pose these questions, but you think about like, if this reincarnation is really happening, what would you expect? And so if people are really remembering their past lives, it seems like people remember about things. They remember, oh, this, I was the third James. It's usually like little bits and pieces, right? So I was the third James, and I was killed in this on this ship, or I was shot down by the Japanese. I was on this ship, this aircraft carrier or whatever. So people get bits and pieces, but they don't get they don't retain like full-fledged knowledge of their life. Just sort of like random bits that can be end up being verified. And I suppose you might say, like, Plato actually had this idea that the shock of birth makes you forget everything that you learned in the heavenly realms, and so you have to and that learning is a form of remembering, and it's all sort of in your soul there, and it's just a matter of sort of prodding it. And if like, if you ever had like a memory, like you're trying to remember something, and then like like usually this happens in the middle of a conversation. You're going back and forth, and you're like what? Now you're waiting for the other person to finish, and then you forget what you're going to say, and then you say, "Damn, I forgot what I was going to say." And they say, "Oh, was it about this? Was it about this?" And they keep on going back to past topics. Yeah, that's it, right? And even though you can't remember at the moment, the person sort of prods you and asks you a bunch of questions, and you remember what it is.
Making connections.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. Like Plato does this thing where Socrates, he's in the Meno dialogue. He takes a slave boy and says, "Look, I'll show you this slave boy knows geometry." And then he like draws a square, does this geometric proof, and he's like, "Okay, slave boy, it's the idea the slave boy doesn't know anything because he's not educated. So what happens if you like bisect this figure here? Are these lines equal or not? You just ask them a bunch of leading questions. But the idea is that inside the slave boy's mind is all like the truths of like how to do math. It's just a matter of just asking the right questions, because it's just innate ability. And that's more of an ability, I suppose. So it might be people have all these abilities sort of built into the human brain. But this reincarnation theory says that you come into your next life not just with like this sort of inbuilt so the idea is you come with like these memories and you learn things in your past life. But why can't you do any of those things you did in your past life? For example, why can't Johnny fly a plane? I mean, there's these like, if you put him in a cockpit, would he be able to fly a plane? Probably not. And the other thing is about let's see.
So this is if they retain identity and not skill. They retain the identity of their past life.
Right.
It might not mean that their identity is still the same and they're just in a different body. It might just mean that they remember the last identity that they had, and now they have this new identity, but somehow, I mean, I would argue it's definitely on the quantum level, if it's at all possible. I mean, having like quantum patterns and quantum entanglement maybe has something to do with it. You never know.
One question is, are all the memories still there?
I wonder if they did hypnosis on any of these kids. Anne Frank or Barbara.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. It's still there. They've done a lot of these things come out through hypnosis, but so typically it's children in hypnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And so, okay, if you think about the three things. Children have problems telling fantasy from reality, easily impressionable, easily led to believe things that never happened by their parents. There's this hysteria about satanic ritual abuse where these kids like made up stories and then got pulled into like this crazy like prosecutor and some police detectives that believed that kids were being abused by Satanists in all kinds of horrific ways. And then they asked all these leading questions, and to this day, some of those kids actually believe that they were the victims of ritual satanic abuse. And it was because they like asked them these questions, and if they gave like a neutral or negative response, they got disapproval, and if they asked them if they said that something happened that was really horrific, and they say like like my teacher is a Satanist or whatever, then they're like, tell us more, would you like a candy bar, right? So and they put these kids under hypnosis too. So after a while, even though none of this stuff actually happened, there's no evidence that it happened, and there's easily falsifiable things that they said happened. Like one of the kids said that like they brought an elephant into the room and slaughtered it, and just all these things. And there was some some dark dungeon chamber where the kids were tortured, and a snake pit, and all this stuff. And they poked all around this preschool and didn't find any of this stuff. So, but the kids to this day, like as adults, they have these false memories. It's called false memory syndrome, where you can actually create false memories in people by reinforcing the things they tell you, and then it gets reinforced, and then as you grow up, you think, oh, it really happened, when it never did. So children are a special problem here, and then also dreams, like people remembered it in dreams, and then hypnosis. And all three of these things deal with like being impressionable, right? So they deal with the distinction between fantasy and reality. And so these things might make you suspicious. Like if people just like consciously started remembering things about their past lives as adults, and could remember more and more as they got older, as their brain developed, that might be pretty astounding. But when you have like stories of children and bits and pieces and dreams and hypnosis, it might make you suspicious that this is really happening, and make you think it's more about sort of fantasy and reinforcing beliefs of the parents or society, particularly. And also like why common in India and the Far East, right? They say Asia. Sometimes Asia is sort of like a catch-all for China, Japan, and India. But that's where the beliefs are most prevalent. And lots of kids have stories about their reincarnated, the ancestors they were reincarnated from. But it's pretty rare in the West for kids to have these stories, even though they pop up. But reincarnation is also sort of taken off in the West too, and it's become more prevalent, particularly with more immigrants coming from India. And with starting in the 60s, the countercultural revolution, you had an interest in Eastern religions, people getting away from like traditional Christianity and looking for something interesting and new. All right, let's see. Somebody had another question. So the memories are there. Oh, so who are you? So is this like the personality you are now with others, trapped inside you, trapped in your soul, maybe? Or are you like a sort of a super person? Like a kind of like a combination of individual people. Like when that woman says, I'm really Anne Frank, but she's also what was it, Barbara Ann or something? Mm-hmm. So which one is she really? Like it seems like there are a lot of differences between her and Anne Frank, even though there's similarities, there are also differences. Like for example, I'll talk about my twin brother again, right? So my twin brother and I have similarities. But we also have differences. So even though we're like probably more similar than any two people that think, any two people where one person thinks they're a reincarnation of the other person, but we're not the same person, right? We have different personality, different likes and dislikes, and we're a different center of consciousness, right? So he has his thoughts, I have my thoughts, and they don't mix. Now, it seems like that's the case with the reincarnation. There's overlap, like you can remember some things that happened to this other person. But are you that person? Or are you a new person that has like some scattered memories from the old person? And is that old person, does the old person still exist someplace in your soul, like tamped down there? Is there like a separate personality? And then is that really life after death, right? So you can think either you're the person you are now, your memory and personality and your likes and dislikes, and that's you. And there's multiple people like sharing your soul, sort of this, let's see. So one idea is just like, there's sort of like me, and I'm sort of running the show, and then there's like all these other sort of personalities, say, tamped down there. And they sort of, give me like little bits and pieces and fragments of my past lives. I go into a hypnotherapist and they sort of come back, maybe I'm a kid, I have dreams, I get little bits and pieces. So are they still there, or are these just like ghostly fragments of people that will never be again? And it seems like if all there is left of you, like think about some future incarnation, and they, there's like some person in the future, Ren Slarg, and he's like a starship captain, right, or something cool. Oops, with dyslexia. Starship captain. Let's say it's not too far in the future. So he does the Earth to Mars bit, right? So he's like basically a space bus driver, and does the Earth to Mars, right? So then he and let's suppose he's a reincarnation of Carl, right? So and so down there is like all Carl's memories, and popping up about being in some crazy class at community college, and the professors talk about reincarnation, and talk about what if you were reincarnated in some person in the future. And so the question is like, does Carl really exist as a person anymore? Is like, are all his memories there? Is all his personality there, and sort of like a little bit that can kind of come out someday, or might jump into another body and take over it? It seems like the person who is Carl will never be in this idea, or is like, it's basically you're like in limbo for like
schizophrenia
indefinitely, right? Because you don't get to come out and control the body. You're just kind of like tamped down there. So that Ren might remember stuff about you, and he might remember, Carl was really into space stuff, and wouldn't he love doing this now? But it's not like you would necessarily be conscious of like driving the starship. You would just, I don't know, would you have any consciousness at all? It's hard to know. Now suppose he goes in for like past life regression, and so the hypnotist puts him under, and he's like, I'm at Lane Community College, and there's a lecture on reincarnation, right? So maybe you get to pop out for like 5 minutes, and then after the session's over, there's no more Carl. You lapse into unconsciousness, and he takes over, and you have no more awareness, and that's it, like till the end time. So is that really life after death?
Yes.
You say yes. So, but who's like the? I mean, are you experiencing? Are you experiencing? So are you experiencing anything?
Reality? That's life.
But you're not. Are you? Is there like a person there, or is it just like memories? Right? Because there's more to a person than memories. The person has a memory of like something that happened to Carl, but he's not Carl, is he?
Yeah.
Especially have different personality, different likes and dislikes, or he's got his own experiences.
Yeah, you can have infinite experiences. I mean, isn't that all life is just experiencing things and then dying and then experiencing more things, maybe?
I don't know about that. That seems like a tenuous claim.
Yeah, it's super like bleak and all, but I mean, basically everything you do is just experiencing. It's your observation of something.
Well, suppose like,
your identity around
So suppose we took like a memory from my twin brother and we like found out like where it was in his brain. We sort of sucked out the memory juices that made it and just injected them into my brain. So I'd have a memory of like, I don't know, like the first time we went to the beach, like my brother got hit by a big wave and fell down. It was like a really traumatic experience, right? And I would like have that experience. Maybe it's just like, oh, I feel like, you know, I've did this traumatic experience as a kid. But that would mean that I'm him. And if you give me like say 10 memories from, you know, from his childhood, that wouldn't make me him. He's still got his own center of consciousness.
Like that specific event, but I mean that event happens to plenty of people.
Yeah, well,
But
it's
it
like,
has to be
but it would be
specific.
those exact experiences.
But can you remember it that exactly?
Yeah, so suppose I remember as well as he does.
Yeah, but even if someone does remember a past experience, it's usually pretty fuzzy, and it usually has.
Okay,
different
yeah,
details.
so it's the memory is there, right? So,
Yeah.
but that wouldn't make me him, even if I get like,
Yeah.
and people, the things they remember about their past lives is just like these fragmentary bits and pieces, right? So they don't remember everything that happened to them.
Yeah.
So does that mean, you know, what's left of you, like, you know, 50, even if it's 50 memories of things that happened to you throughout your life, it seems like it's typically not even that. That those experiences exist in another person, that doesn't mean that you're that other person. It just means the other purpose is remembering things that happened to you.
Why is the identity so important?
Good question. Well, why? I suppose like, why do you care about yourself more than other people? Maybe the
Because
question.
you want to survive.
Well, why do you want to survive?
Because you want to continue to live, and usually offspring, and so.
Well, that's.
I feel like that's nature too, but I mean, you want to survive because you don't know what comes next. I feel like if we all knew that reincarnation was real, people would be killing themselves a lot really quickly, because it's just like, well, okay, I have a chance to have something else. Okay. Oh, I have a chance to have something else. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it
Maybe
would be
so.
ridiculous, but.
But then it seems like it would matter, like if you say, well, when you're reincarnated, like it's not really good. Your soul's going to go into a new body, and all your memories are going to be gone. Your personality is just going to be like a blank slate, and maybe a little bit of this would be hanging out there in the ether, but it's going to be basically like a do-over with a few little bits and pieces of you. It seems like then it's like if you're interested in surviving, why do you care about this other person having some things that are
Because it's the
similar
only thing
to
that
you?
you know of.
What's that?
It's the only thing that you know.
But it seems like people have concern about themselves, and to say I want to survive means that this next being is going to be me. That's why it matters whether it's me. If it's not me, why would I care?
People want to be the best person that they can be. And so usually people place tons and tons of time trying to mold who they are to create the best picture. Like, let's say there's an infinite universe, infinite probabilities. Any decision you make can lead your life in different directions. You're always trying to fulfill and make the best decisions to create the best personality. And that takes a lot of time and work. And so that creates value of the personality, because it took your willpower, your decision making, your experiences, your pains, your struggles, everything to produce what you have now.
Yeah.
And that, I think, would be ill to throw it away, especially if you didn't know that there was an afterlife. But if you did know that there was an afterlife, I mean, for people that are successful then and do have this personality that they always love to have and they love who they are, then maybe they wouldn't be. But then people that aren't necessarily like that have been, you know, unlucky with natural selection or whatever.
Well, what if we cloned you and we grew like we drew like new Harrison's body, and then as Harrison 2 grew, Harrison the second, he would have like, he'd just grow up like a normal baby. He'd have a different set of experiences. He'd have a different center of consciousness, right? He'd have thoughts and you'd have thoughts, and originally his thoughts would be just like sort of like weird, it's kind of vague, like thoughts that infants and toddlers have, and he'd learn about the world. He'd develop a different personality. Might be some similarities because the same genetics, but some might be different, right? And then
it depends on how sophisticated this cloning is.
Well, it's just your genetic material, right?
Okay,
I mean, a clone is just a time-delayed twin.
Yeah,
So suppose he's grown up, and let's suppose you say, well, we'll give you a deal. Like we'll give we'll give Harrison 2 like $1 billion, and we'll take out like 10 memories from your brain and put it in his. So he'll have some of your memories. He's already got a lot of your personality. Looks just like you, has lots of similar tastes and so on. So, and we'll give him $1 billion. You just have to agree that we'll painlessly kill you, and we're going to dissect your body to do some experiment on cloning related, right?
Yeah.
Would you take that deal? Harrison 2 is going to get $1 billion, and he's like you in a lot of respects, and he has 10 of your memories about like the pivotal
I think
things
this has
that
to
happen
do
in your
a
life.
lot with that analogy of the ship being rebuilt, Theseus' ship.
Yeah.
If it has any deviation, then you could argue that it wouldn't be me. But would that observation transfer? That's the real question. Why would my observation disappear if that's still the same me? And it's still me, it's just a new version. But for some reason, my observation, the reason I can see out of this body and not that body, how would you be able to transfer that over? And that would be my fear. But if cloning was, boom, perfect, you could line up every single atom to the exact position that you had. Every neuron.
Oh, that's not cloning though. I'm just talking about the genetic.
I mean,
material.
that's like replacing. Would you still be able to? I mean, that's kind of.
Well, he's got somebody else's. I mean, I suppose maybe he has somebody else's soul in there or something. I don't know. But the idea is that he's developed like, you know, the same way like people that say they're reincarnated are developed.
Yeah.
He has some of your memories, but he wouldn't be you because you're still you. He wouldn't even be you. Suppose we clone you and then we kill you, and then the clone grows up with some of your memories. We save some of your memories and we sort of inject them in there. It seems like it's still not you. Now maybe if it has all your memories, maybe it have all your personality, then maybe it would be you.
Yeah.
If we're somehow able to.
But it's that observation aspect.
But that's the continuity of consciousness, right?
Yeah.
So.
How does that transfer?
So it's like if you have the same consciousness, you're the same person. That's what Locke says: same memories, same personalities, and same like continuity of experience. But if you have a new center of consciousness and a new person, then it seems like it's a different person. So, and this is this idea that it's not really you that's living the future. It's just a series of people that share the same soul. So how about this idea of the super person? You're sort of a mixture of everything. What if you are a mixture of, you know, all of your past lives? Well, I suppose then you wouldn't really be you.
Or you are you, and you're just like a conglomerate of all these people that you now define as you.
But you think that you're the person that's having all the experiences and memories now, but I mean, some people never have these past life experiences that are bits and pieces.
See, that would be really interesting if they actually looked into the brains of these people that claimed all these things, and if they saw like a pretty clear difference in the way the brain developed or patterns in the brain. If there was something pretty noticeable difference between someone that never experienced what we're talking about and then people who have experienced it.
Yeah.
And then compare, and then maybe there is some connection that the brain can create across lives that'll translate into experiences and remembering as if it was your own. I don't know.
Yeah, well, and then it seems like if all these other people are sort of mixed and matched with you, it seems like you're deluded by, you know, all those personalities. So
the question is how could you tell? You would just think it was you. You wouldn't know if you were deluded.
If you could suddenly remember all the things that ever happened in your past lives, would you be the same person?
Yeah.
In other words, you're like, oh, I remember this happening and that happening, and but you know, there's this question about like people that say that they had these experiences. They say it was like a learning experience, but people typically didn't learn anything from it. So I don't know. Let me hit. Let's talk generally about, let's see. Oh, the Hindu and Buddhist version. So the Hindu version, you're basically absorbed by the Brahman or God, B-R-A-H-M-A-N. Put God in scare quotes. And this is the idea. It's like a drop of rain merging with the ocean. So you think about, it's a pretty crappy looking ocean. So you think about a drop of rain, put a cloud here, a single drop of rain falling to the ocean. Does that raindrop exist?
No, we just define different things by its size. So the raindrop is a raindrop. Because
Yeah,
it's
but
so
once it hits the ocean, like you can't distinguish the water that made up the raindrop from the ocean, right? It's just, I think most people would say it's just only the ocean exists. The raindrop doesn't exist anymore as a raindrop. And the idea is this is what's going to happen to you at the end of this reincarnation. And the Hindus saw reincarnation as being a bad thing. They saw that like the wheel of reincarnation is a wheel of pain and suffering. And what you want to do is finally detach yourself from this world of pain, and when you do so, you become more spiritual, and you eventually become one with God. And when you become one with God, there's no more I, there's just God, right? So you're absorbed by God. But then it seems like you don't really exist as a person anymore. Like only God exists. Now they would say, the Hindus would say, well, you weren't a person in the first place anyway, so don't worry about it. Yeah, and this is this idea that so one idea is, let's see, so reincarnation, it's gradual development of the soul, of the individual soul. Spiritual development, leading finally to this term moksha, which means liberation. This is liberation from the wheel of reincarnation. Liberation from the wheel of pain. They don't call it the wheel of pain, but the idea is that life sucks, right? And I suppose if you're like you just go to some backwater of rural India, and people are kind of pessimistic about life. And so the idea is that life is filled with suffering. And so what you want to do is escape it. So why don't you just kill yourself? Well, because then you get like reincarnated as a rat or something. Or you get to a lower station, right? So the idea is there are certain lessons you have to learn, and you sort of advance up through like the Hindu class system. So they have, part of this is this class system of different like stations in society, where you have like the workers in the bottom, and then you have the soldiers, and then you have the priests sort of at the top. Let's see, you get the servants. So the servants at the bottom, then the merchants, then the soldiers, then the priests. And then once you get to like the most spiritual level, then the idea is that you die and you got rid of all your negative karma. You're totally detached from life. You're a totally spiritual person. And then instead of being like slammed back into some other body to suffer all over again, you're free and you become one with God. But at that point, it's kind of like you call it like sort of spiritual suicide or something like that, right? You're just you become one with God, and there's no more you anymore. And the idea is that it's the ego that causes you to suffer. So the ego causes suffering.
But they also believe to like get rid of wants.
Yes, and this goes along with the Buddhist idea too. So the idea is you get rid of the ego, and there's sort of spiritual suicide, if you like, because physical suicide leads just to being reincarnated again. Do it all over again. So you become one with God, and then you no longer suffer. But there's a second story, which is like you already are God now. You just don't realize it. And this is, you think about like the story of the Wizard of Oz. So what happens in the story of the Wizard of Oz?
A little girl gets swept up in a tornado and appears in a magical land, and then runs down this golden road, meets this really creepy guy, and then makes her way to this midget resort where she meets a bunch of those guys, and then that's all run by this other witch that is a good witch, and then the good witch has beef with this bad witch, and I think there's like something to do with clicking shoes together to get back home. Yeah.
There you go, yeah.
So
in between,
Yeah,
like,
that was it.
so that's like, but what about like in the middle, like what happens in the story?
She meets the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, who else?
The lion.
And the lion,
Lion,
right?
yep.
So courage, one is on my heart,
Oh,
one
yeah,
doesn't.
Like the head or the intellect,
Yeah.
right? So the idea is that she gets swept up by a tornado and like goes to this magical land and has these adventures. And at the end, remember, like the wizard, she finally gets to meet the wizard, and he hands out these awards to like the Scarecrow for learning intelligence, and the Tin Man learns to have a heart, and the lion has learned courage, right? And Dorothy has learned, you know, that there's no place like home, and she's like, she's like homesick and really misses her home. Where if you remember at the beginning of the movie, which is done in black and white, she's kind of like she gets in a fight with her family and runs off. That's why she's caught up in the hurricane and doesn't like being in Borrowdale, Kansas, and which is, you know, she sings that song at the beginning, right? Somewhere Over the Rainbow. She wants to fly away and you know get out of this backwater town in rural Kansas and like do something interesting, right? So she despises her normal everyday life. She wants something better. And then she goes through all these adventures and realizes, this was like my life before was actually really good, and now I miss it. I didn't appreciate it, and so she has to like she gets the red slippers, right, and has to click them together and her heels together and say, "There's no place like home." And then she ends up in her bed, right? And what does the good witch say to her? He says, "Oh, Dorothy, you didn't realize you were home all along." And now to realize, you just click your heels and say, "There's no place like home." And then she wakes up in her bed, and there are all her relatives, and they all look like, you know, the Scarecrow and the Cowardly Lion and So did she really go on this adventure? And the idea is that she was in Kansas all along, but she had to go through this sort of illusory story, just like this dream, right? She went through this dream to realize all these things about herself, and to realize that she was right where she needed to be. Well, you see this, the Hindu story, it is a story about, you're this soul, you need to have all these lifetimes to learn all this stuff, and then you'll ascend to the spiritual level, and then you'll become one with God. But then there's the second story is like, well, you're already God now, you just need to realize it. And this is seen as like, it's like Dorothy's dream is what we're living out. Over and over and over again, you live all these sort of hallucinatory dreams where like nothing in the world you see around you is real. It's all an illusion, but it's part of this process where you're sort of working towards God. You're working towards the realization that you already are one with God, that you are God. You just don't know it.
So what happens when you do realize it?
Then you're not reincarnated anymore. Although really there's no reincarnation anyway, it's just only God. So yeah, can you make this irrational sense of this? I don't know, but the idea is that you're God now, you just need to realize it. And what, as a scholar, what I would say is that, so Hinduism starts out with this idea of individual souls, and then they develop this, and they have like these multiple gods, and they all start thinking about all these multiple gods are the manifestations of the same God, and then they get this idea that everything's a manifestation of God, and then the idea is that your soul is part of God too, and that everything's one, we just need to realize it, and that gets like layered on top of this idea of reincarnation in the individual soul, because in religion you never throw anything away.
Yeah.
So like as a scholar I would say like basically you have this old style individual soul religion and this sort of idea of reincarnation, and then you get this mysticism that everything is one laid on top of that. But anyway, the question is at the end of, at the end of time, you become one with God and your individuality is obliterated, But then the Hindus would say, well, you weren't really a person to begin with. You're not, the ego is an illusion too. So hope for life after death in like the real Hindu picture, not like the westernized version of reincarnation. It's not really going to be you, and you don't really exist as you anyway, so don't worry about it. That's what the Hindu would say. So there's no real life after death in Hinduism, only this sort of idea of the realization of your own non-individuality. How about Buddhism? So Buddhism is this idea of a state of desireless bliss. So it's called
desireless bliss.
Nirvana. So desire is seen like an itch, and the idea is that the more you scratch, the more it itches. And you scratch one place and you itch someplace else. And so in life is like you're itching all over all the time. And so what do? Well, the Buddha has his spiritual salve that he's going to help stop the itching. So what you do is you stop scratching, and you follow what he's called the Eightfold Path. So the basic idea is that life is suffering. Suffering is caused by desire. The way to get rid of suffering is by getting rid of desire. And so you try to whittle down your desires as little as possible. So there's two reasons you suffer, right? So suffering is caused by getting what you don't want. A toothache, a student loan bill, crushing debt, right? Or a ticket, right? You're like, you have to pay money to somebody, it's painful, right? Or there's also wanting what you can't get. Like that person you've been pining after and wish you could be with in a romantic way as Valentine's Day approaches, right? Or that super new, like the iPhone 10 or whatever it is now, or an island in Tahiti or whatever people dream about. Getting the hell out of this place where it's cold and rainy all the time. They see the sunshine. We have sunshine today, but people have all these things where they want that they can't get. And so the Buddhism says you're suffering because things happen to you and you don't want them to happen, or there's these things you do want to happen that aren't happening. And what people tend to do is they tend to get really upset when the things happen that they don't want to happen, and then they start chasing after the things they want, like money or romance or whatever it is, and they're just perpetually unhappy. So what you got to do is like lower your expectations. And Buddhism is a language, or it's a religion of lowered expectations. So stop wanting so much. Don't expect so much out of life. And when something bad happens, you just shrug your shoulders and say, it's life. Stuff happens, right? And then when and stop wanting so much and stop chasing after wealth and power.
That's why they meditate so much.
Romance, yeah. So just be happy. Just do enough to get by. So you satisfy desire just enough to make it go away. So the idea is that like desire less, and you will become desireless. That just occurred to me.
So they desire to be desireless.
Yeah, so yeah, I suppose that's a paradox. So, like, and then when you become desireless, this is the idea, you get reincarnated and then all of a sudden you go to nirvana. Now the Buddha was asked about nirvana. It's it means literally like the snuffing out. Oops, snuffing out. Like you snuff out a candle. This is the metaphor. This idea that you put like a little cup over a candle on it. So the question is, what's being snuffed out? Is it desire, or is it the person? Is it this form of like sort of spiritual suicide? And so, and the Buddha was asked one time. He's like, this person was kind of getting fed up because he says, "Well, I've been out here for a while now, and I'm on some answers." And he has all these list of questions, and one is like, so when I go to nirvana, is it really me, or is it just like there's no more me, I just don't suffer? In other words, that nirvana is supposed to be a place where you're free from suffering. And the question was, is it like oblivion, and I don't suffer because I don't exist as a person, or is it like I like a heaven or something like that? And the Buddha basically said it didn't matter. So he said, like, when you get to nirvana, it doesn't matter that whether nirvana is you existing in the future, or whether nirvana is just nothingness, the peace of not suffering anymore. Like if you're a materialist, you commit suicide, you end your pain by killing yourself. And he basically said, whether it's spiritual suicide or heavenly bliss, it doesn't matter. The only point is you're not suffering anymore. Well, if I was that guy, I would say, you know what, that really matters to me, because like one of those things I would regard as good, and the other thing I regarded as bad. So there's this question about what snuffing out means, and I think really it means both. The idea that you don't really have a personal existence. The way it's described is in sort of mystical terms, but you don't exist as an individual person because you don't have any desires. So I would say you can't be a person without desires.
Well, what if it was possible to not have an identity at all? Like, you just didn't have an identity.
Well, I mean, a lot of the Buddhists will say, well, you're not really a person to begin with. Maybe I'll pose this as a question. Can you be a person without desires? How would that work?
Well, I'm saying, like, if you didn't have identity, you wouldn't feel pain because you wouldn't have an identity to anything that you have an identity with, because that is what makes your identity, is your associations with things.
Yeah.
So the things that you're associated with, something bad happens to it, your identity isn't centered on that.
You don't care.
It's nothing to you.
There's this sort of idea
This isn't your identity.
let me go back here. This idea of this idea of apathy. I mean, it's sort of this idea that apathy is a spiritual value, like not giving a damn about anything, right? And the idea is that once you get to the point where you literally don't give a damn about anything at all, and don't care about anything, then that's when you'll reach this sort of spiritual level. And so, but then the question I would ask is like, can you really be a person without desires? Imagine like you're, you got like cancer, and they're pumping you full of morphine, and maybe they got some drug that allows them to like keep you alive perpetually, but you'd have a lot of pain, so they also have to pump you full of morphine. So all you're doing is laying in the hospital bed, and you're like totally like blissed out, and you're like, wow, right? And you don't have any conscious thoughts, you don't have any memories, you don't have any goals. You just like lay there in the bed going like, wow. Are you still like a person? Are you like more like a vegetable?
I have no idea.
So this is sort of like the spiritual version of like an eternal drug trip, right? We were talking about drugs earlier. Actually, let's drug trip. It seems like you're not really a person anymore if you're not having any thoughts, if you don't have any hopes and dreams, if you don't have any goals. if you're not doing anything, you're laying there in the hospital bed going, wow, this is like awesome. I mean, you wouldn't even say this is awesome. You just like your whole body, all your experiences in bliss, and that's what nirvana is supposed to be. It's supposed to be complete peace. Because the moment you have the idea that, well, you know, I'd really like to do X, that means like that scene is like painful, right? Because that means there's this thing you have that you don't want, or you have this thing that you want that you don't have, right? So you're missing something. So that's not complete bliss. Bliss is you have everything. There's nothing that you want, and it's not that there's nothing you want because you have everything you want. It's that you don't want anything, and so it's like this.
There's no need for anything, but needing also is you need to eat. So
well, not if you're like in nirvana. You're like
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like maybe it is impossible because at some point your biology is going to need something.
Think about it's like, you know, your
desires don't really cover needs. I don't think.
How would you define desire then? Because like.
Well, you can desire to have really good tasting food, but you don't need really good tasting food to live. You can just eat really, like, I don't know, oats all day long, just enough to survive.
Also, the Buddhists will eat like your rice and vegetables and stuff, and try not to enjoy them too much, I guess. So,
yeah, just don't enjoy anything.
Well, there are people like diabetes and stuff. They have to eat when they're not hungry, just to maintain constant blood sugar. There's physical needs. So like, if you're like a hardcore Buddhist and you're like, I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to fulfill any of these like bodily desires, then you'll end up dying. So the idea is, this is the idea of the middle path, that you feed your desires just enough to get by, just to make them go away.
I would say that it has extremely powerful effects on how you view things if you are capable of eradicating your ego for any given amount of time. Like there are, you know, ego death with certain psychedelic drugs. I've heard of that, and so I feel like that could be a pretty solid type of. What was a good put? It's almost as if you finally get to see what that type of reality is like. It isn't your reality, but now you have a perception of that reality. So a perception that the ego doesn't exist, a perception of where you don't have your identity, where you aren't who you are. I feel like that could be pretty life-changing, just like that, because I feel like you view your own identity so much differently, because you would know that, well, maybe it is possible that I don't have an identity, or, you know, something like that. Whatever that would guide you in any way or not.
It might be something about like not being too attached to the outcome of things. It might help psychologically. Yeah. But this idea of having no desires or goals, and aren't your goals and your, you know, likes, dislikes, your hopes, dreams, hopes, even your fears, you know, aren't they part of you? Right, this is all like this is part of your personality, part of what you're about, your values, right? Those are all, put values up here. These are all couched in terms of desires, things you want, things you don't want, things you like, things you don't like. Yeah. So those are all a part of you. So if preserving you is important, it seems like this Buddhist story doesn't do that. So neither the Hindu nor the Buddhist story really preserve personal identity. So there might be something that exists, but it's not going to be you. And so if that's the case, then you know, maybe there's some spiritual something that exists after the death of the body, but it's not going to be you. So why should you care? It's not really going to give you life after death, because you won't be the one who's living in this other world. That's all we have time for. Next week we'll start in on free will.